From my left, your right, is Representative Sarah Fowler Arthur, the sponsor of House Bill 563. State Representative Ron Ferguson, the lead co-sponsor of House Bill 563. To my right is Brent Schwander, the CEO of the Columbus Realtors. To my further right is Jennifer Carroll, who is a short-term rental host that will tell her story. And on the far right is Jeff Smith, also another short-term rental host who will tell his story about how and why that's important. What I thought we'd do is just begin with some questions. And I'll start with the state representatives. I think a basic question about the legislation is, can you tell us why it's important for Ohio and your constituents? And we'll start with Representative Fowler Arthur.
Thank you. Okay, that's good. So I represent Northeast Ohio, which is Ashtabula and part of Geauga counties, at least at the present time. And we have a lot of involvement with tourism, agritourism, a lot of really unique features in our area, whether it's Lake Erie, the Spire Institute, a lot of great wineries. And so we are really focused on bringing in more people to visit our area. We have currently a shortage in housing or short-term stay availability through the hotel industry, and a lot of times we're finding that for big events people have to stay over an hour outside of the area and come in. So we would really like to be able to see this expand in the future, and this bill in my mind is more proactive to make sure that we're opening up that opportunity for everyone in the state as we move forward.
Great. Now, Representative Ferguson, do you want to sort of talk a little bit about what the bill does and why it's important for Ohio and your constituents?
Yeah, so this bill does something very important for all Americans, for all Ohioans, which is really supports that property. So life, liberty, property are pretty foundational American values, and this really makes sure that your most important asset for most people, your home, is something that you can utilize. And it really opens up, you talk about constituents, for a working class district like mine, it gives a secondary income to somebody so that they can help put food on the table for their family, maybe allow their kids to go at Little League or karate or the extra things they want to do. And then also on the vacation side, it gives more options for people that want to get out and vacation and maybe go to some places where there might not be other accommodations.
Thank you very much. Now we'll move to my right with Brent Schwander from the Columbus Realtors. Can you talk a little bit, Brent, about the Columbus Realtors and their perspective on this issue? Maybe also talk a little bit about the entire ecosystem of lodging. There are hotels, there are short-term rentals, and we kind of need it all.
Yeah, absolutely. So thank you. I still call you Congressman.
Just Steve is fine. Yeah.
Thanks, Steve. So Columbus Realtors has really been involved in this, and I was involved in it in my previous role prior to becoming CEO as our Vice President of Government Affairs with Columbus Realtors. And it was 2017, I believe, when the city of Columbus first introduced a bill, which essentially, in all essence, would have been a ban on short-term rentals within the city of Columbus. The first draft piece of legislation that was put out was 104 days. We ultimately got that to a much better spot, which I actually tout to my colleagues across the country in the realtor world that this is a model legislation that can work across the country. For us as Columbus Realtors, what we say we do and what we do on a daily basis is defend private property rights. That is the right to use your property, and that is a right to earn an income from that property. And so for us, this is truly a private property rights issue. But to your point, hotels and short-term rentals work collectively. For those who know me, know that I'm very loyal to one hotel brand, earning miles and points as quickly and as feverishly as I can. So these all work together and provide options. I think our host alliance that we worked really closely with on the Columbus issue, we have seen, I'll take a step back and say, we've actually seen some sort of bans in other municipalities in Central Ohio One municipality has no more than 2 weeks, and there's others who are looking at other types of options. But we work very closely with the Host Alliance during the Columbus portion of it, and the testimony in and of itself is pretty emotional to hear who some of the guests were. They're not all partiers, they're not all here for nefarious reasons, and actually it's quite the opposite. So for us as Columbus Realtors, it really becomes a private property rights issue.
Great, and one follow-up question on that, just philosophically, do you see any difference between, if I was a property owner, me deciding to rent out my property on a long-term basis versus a short-term basis?
No, and actually, one of the comments that often came up during the Columbus ordinance was short-term rentals are arguably, now it's hard to put data around this and say it factually, are arguably better taken care of and more well-maintained than long-term rentals. Because it requires someone to be there to mow the grass and do the landscaping and change out the linens, and it creates jobs as well.
People are looking at that rental every day, making a decision whether they're gonna rent
Exactly.
for the next day or the next week.
But if I sign a 6-month or a 1 year or a 5-year lease, as a property owner and a landlord, as a housing provider, you sign that lease and you assume that the tenant is doing what they say they're going to do.
Great. Jennifer, can you tell us your story about why you started being a host for short-term rentals, an Airbnb host?
Yeah, absolutely. So the short version of this sort of convoluted story is that I accidentally bought a house.
Happens all the time.
So my landlord was really proud of the south side. She had 20 to 30 properties in that area, was really happy with making sure good people live there. And she had passed away in 2019 in the summer, and the opportunity fell into my husband's and my lap to buy the house, but it happened to be a duplex. We got a really good price on it, and that was obviously a good motivator too, but we didn't know what we would do with that second half. It wasn't rented at the time. We weren't ready to become, landlords full-time. And we also have a lot of family that lives out of the state because we're from Arizona originally. So having that space that is, available for family when they come to visit, and having that flexibility is really nice. We, have full-time jobs and weren't ready to become landlords. So this was a really kind of not that it's less work than being a landlord, but it felt like a stepping stone rather than kind of taking that.
Not a long-term commitment. You can make
Exactly.
short-term commitments, make it
Yeah.
flexible for your family when they want to come in from Arizona.
Exactly, so it's really valuable for that.
Great. Jeff, do you want to talk about sort of how you became involved, if you want to add any color around what being, doing short-term rental means and what it's meant to hosts during the pandemic, or you can just talk about why you became an Airbnb host, but I want to add a little other option to add some flavor if you want to change a little, add a little extra
Okay.
flavor.
So I started about 5 years ago. I have a big house with a 3rd floor that I use not a lot, and I also have a carriage house with an apartment above it. So it just seemed like an interesting idea to start doing Airbnb. I've done long-term rentals in the past. I've owned other properties. But this seemed like a good way to ease into retirement and not work full-time. So I've been able to do that, so that's been very helpful.
So it's actually allowed you to cut back your hours because you have income coming in from your unused space in your house and your carriage house.
Exactly. So that's been very helpful. And it's not easy money, as some people think. It's a job. You have to work at it. But it's been fun. It's fun to meet people and have people come in and kind of show off your city and neighborhood. So there's a lot of different reasons people host. It might be, the mother who wants to have that extra income for school, for activities, a family that wants to go on vacation, a retired person who maybe has lost their spouse and they want to stay in their house and they just need that extra income. So we worked very hard with Columbus to come up with positive legislation. So as Brett mentioned, as a neighbor, I would much rather have a short-term rental than the party house that I did have across the street from me for several years. And we also find most hosts have no interest in having a party and having their property damaged. So we are there, we are running those properties and making sure they're in excellent shape.
And every day, people make a decision whether they want to come to that property, so it's gotta look good, right?
Right, you live and die off the rating system, so if someone's had a bad experience.
5 stars matters, right?
Yeah.
I just wrote that note down.
Well, let's go back to the representatives, both of you, Representative Fowler Arthur and Representative Ferguson, both of you live in more rural areas of the state. Some of your constituents don't have access to hotels. We already talked about how travel and tourism in Ohio requires the full ecosystem. We need hotels, but we need short-term rentals. Can you, each of you, talk about how short-term rentals can give people access to areas that there's not a hotel currently? Either one of you that want to take that one.
Well, I think for our area, again, we have a lot of wineries, we have a lot of tourism around the lake, and what we tend to see is we have some large events, and we want people to come into the area and stay. And pre-COVID, when I was planning my wedding, I was trying to find enough space for all of the guests I wanted to invite to be able to stay, and realized that we do have a shortage at certain times of the year for short-term stays, for people that want to come and visit. And so having more options in the area can bring people in to enable them to stay a little bit longer, enable them to see a little bit more about what our county and region has to offer. I think we also were discussing a little bit about how it provides some flexibility sometimes for larger family groups to travel, because they don't have, maybe they can rent a whole house as opposed to just one room, and they aren't limited to 4 people. So if you have more children, or if you're traveling with in-laws and extended family, sometimes that's an option that people want to be able to experience as well. So for my area, we're looking at it, hopefully bringing in more visitors, allowing us to expand some of these events, and great things like the D-Day event and some of these opportunities at the Spire Institute for some of the international sports events. And we would like people to be able to stay in the area, visit more of our local restaurants, see more of our agritourism opportunities, and we think this will be a really helpful opportunity for some of the small business owners. And before I turn it over to Ron, I'd just like to say I also have several folks that have reached out to me from the district since introducing the bill, talking about how important it has been for their family, for some of the same reasons that the hosts here have already mentioned, whether it be a single parent trying to boost their income and provide better opportunities for their children, or have a lady who's been widowed and wanted to be able to stay in her home, and so she's using that additional income to be able to stay at her home instead of having to rent an apartment herself.
Representative Ferguson, anything you want to add on any of those topics?
Yeah, so the most populous area that I have is Steubenville, and so we have Franciscan University of Steubenville. There's a lot of business that happens there, so we have plenty of hotels to really fit the needs of the community there. But 2 places that you often see in my district where short-term rental sometimes really helps out is once a year in July, we have something called Play My Roots. It's a big country music festival. It's only one time a year, so for something that's only one time a year, you don't always want to build a building, but you could definitely use somebody's home and make some money there. And the other thing is we have a lot of barn wedding venues. So that's really popular in my area, is getting married kind of out in the country. And of course, if you're only getting married on Friday or Saturday typically, then you wouldn't be able to fill up a building the rest of the week, but you certainly could fill up a home for one evening here or there for weddings. So those are some of the times in my district you really see the need for it.
That's helpful, thanks. Thanks to both of you. Let's go back to our hosts on the right-hand side here, and can either of you talk about what it would mean if the income from your short-term rental was taken away by a local regulation that essentially banned short-term rentals? What would it mean to your lifestyle? What would it mean to you personally? Either one of you.
Sure.
Jennifer.
I can see that because of the extra income from our short-term rental, we've paid down 2/3 of our mortgage, and we've owned the house since 2019.
Wow.
I also have tens of thousands of dollars in student loans that, having that money for the mortgage means I can shuffle more towards my, own education and paying that off. Not having that extra income would mean maybe I couldn't make extra payments on my student loans. Maybe I couldn't meet the payments that are required on the student loans. And we would be, paying a lot more interest in our mortgage over time. So there are a lot of financial benefits that we get from the income. The only other option would be we have this empty part of our house that our family stays in once or twice a year. Or, we have to rent it out long-term and gamble on, a resident, and, we don't get to kind of vet those as much as, the people who stay 2 nights, they're gone if they are a problem, they're not there forever. That being said, we haven't had really any issues with that. So really financially, we do rely on this money now. That money covers our mortgage essentially, if we rent out, the maximum that we would like to. Also just not having that flexibility, like I mentioned, for my family, that would be really unfortunate to lose out on. My parents couldn't afford to stay in a separate place if they wanted to visit us, flying all the way from Arizona. They're already making that cost when they visit us. In addition, we are fairly young. We're thinking about having kids in the next 2 years, and we feel like having that income has kind of fast forwarded us to the future, compared to a lot of our peers that are our same age. We have more money in savings. We can say that we've paid off a lot of that debt to have more to think about the future. So, those are all things that we really benefited from, and it would be really sad for us to not have that anymore.
Sure. Jeff, do you want to talk about what the income, if it were taken away, what it would mean to you, and how that would impact your life as well?
Well, there's much more compelling stories than mine, but I'd have to get a job.
But that's the point, is you invested in an asset to allow you to have more time at home and not go to work as much, and then you'd lose that opportunity to profit from the asset that you own.
Exactly, I would lose the flexibility to travel and do things, to work from home. So that would be a big lifestyle change.
Well, Jeff, you talked earlier about the star rating and how it's important, and the star rating goes both ways.
Yeah.
Hosts get to choose who they rent to based on, if I'm a really bad short-term renter, I'm gonna get, my star rating is gonna get hit, and as you review who you want to rent to, I assume both of you look at that.
Yes, we definitely look at the star rating of the guests that are coming in, and I know they're of course looking at the rating on the property they're looking at. So it does go both ways, and people I think are mostly on their best behavior. I think what we hear about are the rare exceptions of a party house or a problem guest, and it does happen, but for the most part, people are very pleasant. They enjoy being in your home or in your property, and they're happy to chat with you, or it's a very positive experience.
If only somebody could invent star ratings for rental cars. One last thing for both hosts. As we think about the economic development and the economic output created by these short-term renters, talk about, the conversations you have with some of your guests about restaurants and other businesses they might, or things they might patronize while they're staying in your short-term rentals, because they have additional economic impact over and above just paying you.
Right, beyond paying me, I also have a cleaner who comes in and takes care of the property. But beyond that, I'm in the short north here in Columbus. So as part of my listing, I have restaurant recommendations and clothing stores, all kinds of recommendations for different things. And most frequently asked, so I can share with them my favorite restaurant or local business around the corner. So it's mostly all local business. So we're definitely supporting those businesses and feeding them customers that they may not otherwise get.
Right? If they weren't here, they wouldn't be able to do that. Jennifer, anything to add on that?
Yeah, so at least Airbnb, probably other short-term rental companies have a system for giving a guidebook to your renters. And so, except for the Kroger across the street, all of the businesses there are, businesses in our neighborhood on the south side. We give unsolicited advice to our renters, where to go, where to eat, where to shop in our neighborhood. We live in the south side, as I mentioned, on the wrong side of Parsons, but we're really proud of our neighborhood, and we like showing off all of these wonderful restaurants, and people who have thought, well, my friend told me not to stay on that side of Parsons. They will tell us, we were actually surprised, we didn't get robbed, and we had a lot of good food to eat, and, liked the area, and we really like having that effect too. It feels like a larger impact.
So you're growing your community, improving your community's reputation as you look out for your own, livelihood at the same
I
time.
will take credit for that, yes.
Good for you. God bless you. Well, one final question before I open it up to the whole panel. Brent, so as we at the Chamber think about this issue, we think about it as a private property issue and private property rights, but I also think it's really important, and I've made this point a couple times, and all of us, I think, have echoed it, that it's important that we note that the travel ecosystem requires hotels, it requires short-term rentals. This is a symbiotic relationship. This doesn't have to be a fight. Both can and should coexist, and the people that travel want both. Do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, so I think it's a great point. The pie is large enough for everybody to have a piece of it, right? The travel and tourism in Ohio, and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me, but when I'm traveling for business or when I'm traveling solo or with my wife, we stay in a hotel. When we're traveling as a family, we travel and we'll stay in a short-term rental. The other thing I would add, Steve, quickly, just from a Columbus Realtor standpoint, and I think you guys hit on it, and so did the representatives, is this is about, for us, it's about responsible ownership. And when we talk about responsible private property rights, we talk about responsible ownership, whether that's being a homeowner, whether that's being a short-term renter or a long-term renter. Municipalities, counties, townships, all have the tools in their toolbox, whether it's by code violations or by criminal penalties in and of themselves, to regulate any bad actors. But to the point earlier, it really is, when I think about it as a Yelp perspective. Those stars matter. The hosts really want to truly, for the most part, there's always going to be some bad actors in every industry, rent to quality renters, and I think renters want to rent from quality hosts. So I think there's tools in the toolbox that can be utilized for those bad actors, but allow the consumer to decide what best meets their needs at that time, whether that's hotels or short-term rentals.
Great, thanks, Brent. Why don't we go down the road, starting with Representative Fowler Arthur, and any additional comments anybody wants to make, and then we'll open it up to questions from anybody in the room. And you don't have to add anything, but if there's anything we missed that you feel like would be additive, feel free to add whatever that maybe I missed with my questions.
Well, thank you, and Brent's comments reminded me of some of the information I included in my co-sponsor request, and in 2019, Ohio was ranked the 13th most fun state to visit. We were 5 states ahead of Michigan. And we were a little bit below our adjoining state of Pennsylvania, which matters a lot for those of us on the east side of the state. Our tourism industry in Ohio as a whole was bringing in over $42 million. And as families are changing the way that we travel, there are currently over 12,500 Ohioans opening their home in a short-term rental in Ohio. And so the impetus of this bill is to make sure that those individuals continue to have the freedom to open up their home, invite in tourism, invite in the industry and the growth in our neighborhoods that it brings. And we look forward to supporting local governments in properly regulating those for the health and safety of the community, but in making sure that the individual's property rights are also respected.
So freedom, options, competition, independence, those are all things that are really promoted by this bill, and it's what makes our country great. I think it's what will help make our state great, so happy to continue working on it.
More freedom, please.
You know, from our perspective, working with the Host Alliance on the Columbus issue and others in Central Ohio is critical. Like I said, I'll just reiterate, for us, it's a private property rights issue, and we as an organization believe in responsible ownership, whether that's actual ownership, short-term and or long-term. And thank you to the representatives, and you, Steve.
Thank you. Jennifer?
So, some final things to add for me are that, a limit on frequency, for example, if that was part of a future permitting issue for short-term rentals, that would have prevented a family who was here with their baby in the NICU down the street, from staying for 2 months in our place. Or another family who had traveled from South America for gene therapy at the hospital. They were here for 2 months. Those individuals, that's the, human side of it. They're not party guests. We live next door, so that's also a deterrent, But these are families who are here for a reason, whether that's getting medical care, whether that's, visiting OSU, college, looking for colleges. These are people who are here for a reason, to see the community or to, access the community in some way. And we provide a very, family-friendly, humanistic kind of place for them to stay that's personal, and we look out for them, and we have only had good experiences as hosts. So we're glad that we'll be able to continue, hopefully, with all your help.
Jeff, some final words before we go to questions.
Okay. As we worked through the Columbus legislation and had many public forums and heard all the opposition to Airbnbs, we found that it was all fear-based. It wasn't real. It wasn't based on actual experience. So I think opposition to short-term rentals is based on the unknown. And when it's explained to people and they sit down and think about it, as we've mentioned earlier, the host is there, the owner is there multiple times a week, potentially, or very frequently. Or when I've owned long-term rentals, I might drive by once a year if the tenant's paying rent. So I think it's just the unknown. In Columbus, we've gone through multiple iterations of the legislation. It's been tweaked. But there hasn't been opposition to short-term rentals. So that's kind of disappeared as people became more familiar and realized it wasn't a blight on the neighborhood, but a positive thing for their neighborhood.
Great way to close it out. Does anybody have any questions before we close this out? Well, I think we're going to wrap it up here, but
That means you did a great job.
well, everybody, I want to thank our panelists for a great conversation. House Bill 563 for the Ohio Chambers about private property rights, and we're proud to be a supporter. We want to thank the sponsors for their hard work. I want to thank the hosts and Brent for coming in to talk about this from your perspective. I want to thank everybody in the audience for being here today. We're going to make this video available on YouTube, so you can go to the Ohio Chambers YouTube channel. We're going to send it out to a lot of the press corps, and I'm sure that they'll be doing some stories on this. But thanks for attending today, and I hope everybody has a great Ash Wednesday. Thanks so much.